Hey, welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time, welcome. My name is Derek. This is Chocolate City Tech. As usual, click the like button, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. All right, so today we're going to continue with our JWT. This tokens this is going to be essentially part 2 of our JWT authentication. So we got a lot of stuff to write, so let's just jump right into it. It's going to be a whole lot easier for me to actually show you. What we've done is we created JWT token authentication. So at this point, you can pretty much be done. Your user can log in. We issue a JWT token. The idea is that the user now, or the client, I should say, can now submit that JWT token and be logged in, authenticated, and it can be done. All right. You don't have to do the JWT piece, but as with most things when it comes to security, there's, the more layers you can add on top, the better. So what we created was we created a simple JWT token authentication pipeline. So let's start from the very beginning, just to go over certain things. So we created a authentication, which uses a JWT bearer as the authentication scheme. We issue out our server at this point issues our JWT token, checking on a few things. Let's actually go to the flow and see what a user does, right? Your typical user or your typical client, what they're going to do. Postman up. So currently what we have is we created a simple user, all right, which has a username of test user and some secret as the password. So what we do now is when we want to get a user logged in is that we go to our API where we want to authenticate, which in this case, we create a controller. Let's get to that controller. So controllers, account controller. In the account controller, there's currently one action that is, you can refer to this as allowing anonymous. And we hit this endpoint, this API endpoint with a model. The model contains our username and password, which is what we're going to be passing in through the Postman. So let's go ahead and do that. So we here in Postman, we have a post as the HTTP type, and we have a body that contains username and password. So we just go ahead and hit that. And in response, once we authenticated, the user receives a JWT token. And with this token, we can use this token to now issue requests to our whatever resources we want on our server. So let's copy this. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a get. And here what we're doing is we're going to append for the bearer token, we're going to remove this one that was used for test. Remove that, send a request. And this request was sent to this endpoint. The secret endpoint, which has the authorized attribute on it. So whenever you put the authorized attribute and you have authorized at authorization, or excuse me, at authentication in your pipeline, what that's going to do is it's going to stop the user when, or whoever it is, a client, when that client gets here, is going to say, okay, client, do you have this particular role claim and so on, excuse me, not role claim, do you have this JWT token? And if it does, it's going to allow that user in based on some items that we set forth here, right? So when the user comes in, or when the JWT token comes in, this is our validator. It's going to validate on the user that issued the JWT. The audience, the intended audience, is going to check on the signing key. It's going to validate the issuer, validate the audience, validate the signing key, and also ensures that validate lifetime so that if the token has expired, you can't access our resource, right? And also it says the clock skew to time 0. Make sure that it validates on the exact time that it's supposed to validate on. So that's what we have so far. So at this point, you can pretty much be done. You don't have to do anything else. So the question then is, well, why do I have to do anything else at all? Why do I need refresh tokens? Well, the reason you need refresh tokens is this. So when we create this JWT token, what we did is we created a, let's go to the authentication service that actually issued this JWT token. So if I go to go to implementation. All right, so you see here, what we do is we essentially do an authentication. We check the user, pass the user in, check based on the password I was passing. If the user is good to go, we generate a JWT token. And by the way, ignore these. I think I said this before, but if I hadn't, just ignore the claim piece for now. We're going to touch on that a little bit later. Maybe if not in today's episode, maybe at a later time when I start showing you how to add rows and claims and stuff like that. So ignore the rows portion here and things like that. But anyway, so what we do is we create a JWT token. And for the time that it expires, we set this to some arbitrary number that you can set yourself, right? It doesn't matter. In our case, we set it to, I think it was 30 minutes. Let's see our options here. Yep, we set it to 30 minutes. That means that I can now that I have this token, I can continue to request as many things, as many resources as I want, ignoring claims and rows. I'm essentially authenticated for 30 minutes. I can keep doing whatever I want. And that also means that if someone else gets a hold of this, they can do the same. So if someone gets a hold of your tokens, they can just keep replaying the token over and over. And you don't want that, right? At some point in time, you want to be able to cut the user off if something was to happen. You want to be able to either revoke the claim or do something to keep the user from, keep whoever it is from continuously accessing your information. So you might be thinking, well, one solution is simple. How about instead of doing 30 minutes, we just put on 1 minute? That way, if someone gets a hold of your token, yeah, that could still do some damage, but honestly, they have 1 minute. So in 1 minute, they probably can't do as much as having 30 minutes, right? Realistically speaking. Of course, you're using a machine, you can do a whole bunch of stuff, but just ignore that for a second. Just think about maybe a human doing this, right? If they only have 1 minute versus having 30 minutes. All right, so that's a little bit better. But then there's a problem with that. The problem is what's going to happen when the actual, valid user gets logged out every 1 minute. What are you going to do? You have to ask them to basically log in again every minute. That's definitely not going to work. So there comes refresh tokens, and that's what refresh tokens do. Refresh tokens allow you to issue two different types of token. So in our scenario, when the user comes to log in and is validated, instead of just handing out a token, we're also going to hand out a refresh token. What a refresh token is going to do is whenever we're going to make the actual token very short-lived, meaning the time that we give it is going to be, something like 5 minutes or something, right? And whenever the user needs to, whenever the user is requesting resources and we check that the actual token has expired, we can also go and check, hey, on that refresh token that we handed out, validate if that refresh token is still good, hand the user a brand new token and a brand new refresh token. So they can keep the requesting refresh tokens over and over without really knowing that that's what they're doing, right? So our app will continue to, our front end, our Svelte program or whatever it is that you're using, front end, whatever it is you're using, can continue to request for refresh tokens over and over and over without the user really knowing anything's wrong. And that really comes down to the whole idea. And what you can do in that case is that the user is able to, or not even just the user, but you are able to at any point in time revoke, refresh tokens to one particular user, and that's done. So to do refresh tokens, there are two ways, or at least two good ways to do refresh token. One is to simply put a property on our user, the application user, add another property and call it refresh token. The pro with that is very easy. All we're doing is just adding one property. We're good to go. There's nothing else with that. The con with that is that the user can only be logged in one place at a time, right? So the user can be logged in on your, the iPhone or whatever, and then be also logged in elsewhere, because whenever you go to look, it's only one reference token that's ever issued, and that reference token always has to match whatever is currently accessing or requesting a current resource. The other way of doing a refresh token is to simply create a brand new table, right? You create a brand new table called refresh tokens, same thing really. And at this point, you can pretty much add whatever it is you want to add. The pro with that is that the user can be logged in multiple places, right? Another thing is that the user can also revoke. Well, you can still revoke the other one, but you can have what we call like an audit trail, right? So you can basically tell your user, or even have either you or the user themselves can actually have access to all the times that they logged in, because every single time they came back and refreshed requested for a new token, you can log that, right? So the user can actually have, depending on your use case, you can have a whole year's or 10 years worth of data as far as like how many times you logged in, when you refresh your token, and all that stuff. I mean, it's data, right? You can think of whatever it is you want to use with it. But it's not really that much more work. So we're actually going to take that route. So with that said, let's jump into coding because we got a lot of stuff to do. So. All right, so we created a refresh token. All we need is obviously a key, string for the token, user ID, which is going to map over to the application user that we created, the time that it expires, the day that we created it, when we revoked it, and then we can also add its active property. All of these can be used, to sort of help us into deciding whether the user is still valid and so on and so forth. All right, so in case you're not familiar with any framework and how it works, what we're doing here is we're creating a way to map the user back to the refresh tokens and vice versa. If you're not familiar with any framework, I suggest you probably take a look at one of the videos that maybe I may do, or someone I'm sure at this point has done more than enough videos about how to do references and stuff like that. And I'm also going to create a configuration for the refresh token. Before we actually go ahead and do the refresh token, let me do some quick cleanup on our user controller. Let me take off this thing here. I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. And I realize that if I add something, that means I need to probably go ahead and explain more of it. And I don't want to detract from the work. So I'm going to remove some of these things that we don't need. Also rename this to not account controller, but let's do a more conventional way of making a plural here. So let's rename that to accounts. Yes, go ahead. And as you can see, that renames it for me. So I prefer that a little better. And I think I'm missing the, let's rename this here because that's not a service. Make that a service. All right. There you go. Now I feel a little better. Let's make our whole class here authorize. And we're going to put allow anonymous on this one because right now that's the one that we want you to be able to authenticate on. So we will do the same with the refresh token property as well, or refresh token method also. Might as well, we're here. Let's go ahead and create that. So call the routes refresh, which makes sense. Just make it a lowercase. Almost all of this is going to be same for now. Just do that to keep it from annoying us for the meantime. We'll come back and finish that piece. So now we're going to create a what is called configuration. So let me actually add a folder here for that. What we're going to do is we're going to build it out. We don't have to build out all the properties, by the way. We just have to build out the ones that we want to put some specific annotations to. So build it out to table. All right, so in case you can't make this out, basically all this is saying is that we want you to build a table. Here's the name of the table. And you can actually pass in schemas and stuff like that, but we're not doing all that. And that it has a key, and the key is to this GUID that we put on top of the refresh token class. And we're telling it that we wanted to auto generate the user this property whenever a new version of a new row is inserted, right? So we don't have to create a brand new GUID whenever you create one. And then here we do is we are actually doing the foreign mapping. We're saying that this entity object called refresh token has a type of user, only one of it, so one-to-many relationship. And that entity, which in this case is type user, has many refresh tokens. And the way to map it is by using the user ID to map that over to this entity. And that's pretty much all you have to do. Now, in order for any framework to pick this up, what we need to do is we need to go to our context and make sure that our context is aware of this. All right. So this is how we tell any framework how to basically tell where that configuration is and how to use it. All right. So next thing we want to do is we want to add a piece for creating the refresh token itself. Here we're using an RNG crypto service provider. We passed it kind of bytes we want to generate. In this case, we're using a 64, and you can do probably 32 or something. It'll be more than adequate. And then we want to base 64 it, so that should be good enough. So now we have to sort of change the way that we were initially handing out the auth result. So in order to make use of the new DB context, specifically the refresh token that we just added to the DB context, we need to bring in our DB context so we can actually make use of it. So that's what we have here. So before, what we were doing is simply sign in. If you were successful, we return the result and we're good to go. But now we also need to generate a refresh token. So we're going to generate this refresh token and attach it to the token object, the result, since we just created a refresh token property on it. And we also need to save that in the database. So when you come back and we collect it, we can actually, invalidate that old one, make a new version of it, and things like that. And we don't have to pass in the byte size because we already initialized it to 64. So let me not do that. Let me actually initialize it here and then use part of it. So we created a refresh token, which we already had before. Excuse me, generated token. We knew about that already. We created a brand new refresh token um, down here. We assign that to the result so that we can return that to the client. And we created a new refresh token to attach to the user object so that that could be saved. And what we did here is we set some initial values that it is active. With the day that was created on, when it expires, we given it 1 day, and obviously you can make this any amount of time you want, and also make it configurable just like we configured the minutes that the regular token expires. And then of course we attach the actual token itself that was generated here in the refresh token. We add it to the user so that it can be saved into the user table, save changes. And that should be it. Actually, I don't even think we need to call update because update is usually only necessary when you need to attach the property. So I don't think we actually need to call update. It should just refresh and save changes. All right. Next thing we want to do is this obviously is not going to be all that we need because whenever the user comes back, we're not going to go through the same process again. We're not going to go through a sign in. So we need to create another method here that's going to just do one thing and one thing only, generate refresh tokens. So let's go ahead and do that. And really the signature should be pretty much the same as this. Well, not exactly the same, but let's call that refresh token async. And we're not going to take on this. All we need to do is to take in the old refresh token. I have to call expire. All right, so the first thing we want to do here is we want to go ahead and grab the user instance. At this point, we don't technically know who it is, right? So someone is just requesting a refresh token. So we want to find any users, specifically one user that has a refresh token that matches the refresh token that was passed in. So if there is no user, then just return the current result. As you remember, the current result will just bring back a token, which in this case would be empty. Refresh token would also be empty, and its validated will obviously be empty as well. So, excuse me, yeah, it will be false. So we will know that that user doesn't exist, and we can cancel that user out. Next thing we want to do is we want to check if the token is still valid, right? All right, so we have the refresh token. At least one of it existed. So honestly, this check is probably unnecessary because otherwise this would have returned already. So anyway, so things we want to check on, if the refresh token that is being passed in um, is not active, or the the revoke date has a revoke time on it, we don't want it. Or if it has already expired by now, then we don't want it. In this case, we once again return the result, which implies that you're gonna get authenticated. So if all these checks are good to go, that means we fall out of that, and we can now create a brand new refresh token, save the refresh token, and return it along with a brand new token as well. So all right, so let's go over this real quick. So what we did was we looked for an existing refresh token, check to make sure that it was still valid by checking the active, the revoke date, and the expire date. So we got basically three different ways to check. Um, and once we found it, what we did was we basically invalidated it by setting the its active false and revoke to right now so that it can be used again. We can even revoke it to like negative back time, but I don't think that's necessary. um, then we create a brand new refresh token. We set the um, we set a new token on this by generating a brand new refresh token. Then we add a token to the user object. And from then on, then we also save the user. And you notice I actually went back to make sure that user was getting updated by calling this entity state modified, just in case. I think it still should work, but and then call or wait save changes. And then of course we're going to go ahead and return our brand new refresh token. All right, so we almost have all our pieces together there. One thing we didn't do though is that this should actually belong to the um, interface. So let's go ahead and bring that. And here we're not going to need this piece. We're only going to need this part, of course. Save that. All right. Let's go ahead and update our controllers class. So we have our refresh token. Obviously right now it's not doing anything. So let's update that and change that. Bring that down. So refresh. And of course this should be returning a refresh token to us. For now, what we're going to do is actually, when I issue the token, I'm actually going to issue it in a cookie. So I don't need to actually pass it down for now. Later on, I think I will do another variation where you can pass down the token. Maybe. VR refresh token equals. Let's grab the token from the request object. Request dot headers. Actually, I'm gonna pass it inside cookies, so we can just stick it in there. Cookies and let's see, grab it from. Actually, you know what? Let me not do that. Let me create a. All right, so let's go over this real quick. So we are trying to get the refresh token inside a cookie. If the refresh token does not exist, then obviously we never sent one whenever we authenticate the user. So we're gonna have to come back and change this here. And then what we do is once the user once the refresh token is good to go, what we do then is if it is authenticated, we're going to grab this cookie and we're going to put this cookie option inside this HTTP only cookie, which is going to be for any scenario where you have, if you're going to have our client on the same domain, this is going to be a good way to do this. If not, then we're going to add it in the header. So I'll show you both ways of doing it. But for now, we're going to stick with the cookie example and I'll go through the cookie example first. So use the cookie option, which take some parameters here, or take some properties. One of them being the time when it expires and stuff like that. So, and whether it's also same site or not. And if that's good to go, then what we're going to do is we're going to simply do our request cookies, and then actually, you know what? Since I'm actually going to use this here and here, let me just make a private void class that sets cookies or something. Set authentication cookie, and all it needs is really the string cookie. Yeah. And let's copy this part, bring it down here. Oops. Spawns the cookies. Append. And we're calling this that first token cookie. Pass it in there. So that's not really cookie, that's more of a token. That's really the token string. And then ticks in the cookie option. So that way we don't have to, that way we can actually use it here. Set auth cookie. Taking a result. That refresh token. And then we can return the result here instead of this thing that we were returning before. In this case, all we can really do is just return the result dot token, because we don't need to actually return all of that stuff. And before we actually go ahead and forget, let me make sure that I also update this portion of the code to make sure that when this is done, it also does the same thing here, set cookie. By passing in result that, and here we call it sign in result. So let's change that. There you go. So user logs in, user gets a gets past all this point. User is authenticated. We set a JWT token inside as the return object. So here, let's change this also to token. We are also going to save the refresh token inside the cookies. And whenever the user application gets the cookie, they can return a cookie from the same site, same domain, I should say, and we should be good to go. One of the best ways to tell the user application that it has expired is to give the user application a hint. For our JWT options, we're going to add events, and it's a JWT bear events. All right, let's bring in auth settings. Auth settings that expire token, and value of that should be true. Okay. There. And then I just return this. All right, I should keep it from yelling at us. Oh, that too. One of the issues that you might run into when you have cores is that sometimes it's gonna complain about not being able to grab items, some certain things from the header. So we need to update our cores that we added in earlier. Where is our add cores? Add cores. Or did we not add in cores yet? Oh, it looks like we never added in cores, which hasn't been a problem because we haven't been using our front end yet, but it will be an issue later on. So let's go ahead and remedy that while we add it. So if we're in development, we are also going to add that use cores. And we just call it dev. This isn't important enough for me to make a, what do you call it, out of it. So I just leave it as is. Let's add that in here somewhere. Services dot add cores. Node.js, most of the Node.js frameworks usually at port 3000, but I don't know what spell runs. So for now, we just leave it as yes, localhost, I don't know, 4001 or something. I think that's where it may run. We'll find out soon enough. All right, so next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and before we run our application, we want to run our refresh token, make sure that it gets generated. Let me actually bring up the database. All right, so I'm adding a new migration. All right, so as you can see, it added a brand new migration called refresh tokens for us, which puts in the key, token, user ID, and all the values that we asked for. Now let's go ahead and update the database. Our access is done, so let's go take a look at the database. All right, we expand our tables, and we can see that we now have a new table called refresh tokens, which currently has nothing in it because we haven't saved anything yet. So let's go ahead and request for a token and make sure that a new one is generated for us, and then I'll come back and explain how everything sort of ties in together. All right, so here's our Postman app. First thing we want to do is we want to change this because remember we updated the API to be called accounts. The endpoint for authentication is still the same, so we can leave that as is. It's a post. Our user information is still the same, hasn't changed yet. What you will see here is right now there's one cookie that always gets returned, and this is by the application itself. It's HTTP only token. So let's make a new request for authentication. And that's going to fail because our app is not running yet. So let's go ahead and run the app. All right, so as you can see here, not much has changed. We still get back our refresh token. What has changed though is that you will notice here now it's not just a refresh token that gets returned, we also get returned a cookie. So you can see here we now get a refresh token cookie. So now what we can do is we can make a request, and because we're using a cookie, we don't actually have to pass it through to go get anything. We can simply just make a request to get a refresh token. So to go get a refresh token, what we're going to do is going to make a new endpoint. So let's take this, copy that. And what you're going to see is that this should not do well. And it should be a post, make a request. And we get back unauthorized. We get back unauthorized because this application at this point does not have a bearer token. So let's go back and grab our bearer token from our body. Copy this. And we're going to make a new request to retrieve refresh token. So authentication type is bearer. Remove that old one, copy and paste, make a request to accounts refresh token. We get back 200. Let's go look at the body. The body comes back with a new token, and that's it. So let's go take a look at what it is that the code is doing. You can see that it's obviously working. So what we do is we made initial call to authenticate. The initial call returned back to us a token and a refresh token. What we did was whenever our token is, we obviously simulating the token being expired because we're not waiting for like 5 minutes. But as soon as the token expires, what we do then is we make a request out to get refresh token. And from the refresh token, we get back a new token along with a refresh token. So let's go and check in our table to see if we actually have been generating brand new tokens or not. So initially, this table was empty. Let's make a request again. And as you can see here, we are now creating new tokens. So initial token, token after that. You notice that the new token that's currently active does not have a revoke date on it, whereas the old one has a revoke date, and it's also set to false as the Boolean implies here. So as you can see, everything is nice and working. All right, so what we want to do is, in order to sort of simulate this in expiring, let's give it a really short time. So let's kill this. Let's go back to the user service, and I'm going to temporarily change the generating token here. Originally, we were given it a 30 minutes. Gonna change that. And I'm actually going to make it expire negative time. So I'm not going to change it. I'm actually just going to say negative that. So it basically allows it to expire right away. Let's get back to Postman. Let's go ahead and make a post. So as usual, accounts, username, password, make a request. Our request is good. We get back 200 and the token that we already know has expired, but let's take that. Let's go to our secrets endpoint. And let's go ahead and request to see if we can get the secrets. And as you can see right away, we already can get it. And it's only been, well, hasn't been a minute, but since it already expired in, back time. But even though it has expired, we're going to make a request to our refresh token endpoint. Forgot to allow anonymous. I forgot that I should move this all the way to the top. So this needs to allow anonymous. This is similar to login, because once your token expires, you can no longer come in here. So, all right, so we already know this token has expired, but let's make a request anyway. All right. So the token has expired, but we made a request to this authenticated endpoint. What it did was it looked up our user. It looked up the refresh token that was given, looked at it, says that, oh, okay. And let me put a breakpoint here so you can actually follow through, and I'll explain it as we follow through. All right, so our original token has expired. What we did was we make a refresh token request, looks into the cookies and says, oh, here, there is a refresh token. It exists, goes into the database, goes into our method. Method comes back and says users authenticated. And then from that point, it issues the new token, says to overrides the existing one, and returns the new token, and we're good to go. One other thing that you notice here too is that when we make the request, we had a request, and the request set a expired token to true, because when we made a request and the request was invalid, what it did was it hit this event, and this event attached the expired token. The reason you want to do something like this is that it's going to make it easier for your client application to see when users really are unauthenticated versus when a user is unauthenticated because of an expired token. Hopefully this has been easy to follow and easy to explain. The refresh token idea is pretty simple and straightforward. You create a refresh token every time one expires, a new one is issued along with a brand new token. You make the token itself short-lived so that once it expires, the user now has to come and grab a new one. Let me go back and remove this thing here from negative. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to actually update the settings to make this expire a little bit shorter, maybe 5-10 minutes or something like that, so that it expires sooner and the application on the front end reacts quicker. And that's really all you need to do. One thing I mentioned I was going to do is for anyone who may be using a different way. So there are different ways to return this refresh token to the client side. What you can do is you can actually just not do what I'm doing here, meaning don't pass it through the cookie and don't set it through the cookie. Just send the whole, or you can do both. You can set to the cookie. You can set a cookie, or you can also pass the entire object so that the front end can send it back either through the cookie or it can send it back as an actual parameter by passing it through here. Oh, by the way, let me also update this and make this fun body while I'm here. While I'm doing cleanup, might as well clean this one up too. So that's another way to go about doing it. You don't have to pass it through here. If you decide to send it to the client just like a response, like a JSON response, then the client is free to do as they wish. An alternative will also be, instead of setting in cookie, you can also do something different. You can set in response, similar to how we did this one. So in fact, it's exactly almost the same. So instead of response headers add this, we can also do this here. So we can say, go back here, and let me make a new method real quick. And then of course you call this refresh token. I think we called it refresh token, right? Yeah, refresh token header. And it's really just the token. So that's an alternative as well. So you can do this one instead. That way, what will happen is whenever the user requests for a refresh token, they don't actually have to pass it through the body. They can just pass it through their header. And the way you do this on a client front end is there's a whole bunch of different ways. But if you're using something like Axios or even a Fetch API, you can attach headers. And what will happen is because we added this piece, where is it? With exposed headers, this is going to be seen through. So the next time we meet, what we're going to do is probably going to go, this is most likely going to be the last time we do just ASP.NET backend. Most likely next time we meet, we're going to be doing Svelte. I know I said I was probably going to do Zapper, but because Zapper is dead, I'm still not 100% sure yet. So maybe next time we meet, I'll have a decision on whether we just do Svelte by itself without Zapper, or maybe Svelte and one of those other, routing applications, or one of those routing frameworks or something. So I'm not 100% sure yet, but for now, hopefully this gets you what you need. So even if you were not doing Svelte for the front end, you should be able to get an idea of how JWT tokens work. At this point, you pretty much a really decent, a really good JWT token application. That's all you need. Really not much else you need to get going. You have a refresh token. You can, revoke the refresh token whenever you want. So that's all there is. All right, so if you find this helpful, as usual, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, things like that. Help the channel grow. Yeah, that's all. See you in the next one.